Hello internet, and today's video is going to be a question and queries. I know, it's been a while, but I've had like a great idea. For my giveaway, I had you guys pose some very weird questions to me, and question and queries is basically where I deconstruct weird questions that I've had. So I thought it would be fun to talk about the weird questions that you proposed to me and what I think about them. So Read and Find Out, who is a booktuber as well, I will link her down below. She's great. She posed this question, which is how all of the girls and women in fantasy, particularly post-apocalyptic ones, deal with their periods. Because it's almost like never addressed, which leads me to think about how confusing that was for her as a teen. Like, how on earth did Edward from Twilight cope when Bella was on her period? Great question. Great question. I don't know how Edward coped with Bella's period. I have no idea. Maybe she was on birth control, okay? Because maybe she got like a depot shot. Because like when I got a depot shot for birth control, my period stopped. I stopped having one. Great relief. I hated it. So, hated my period. Did not like it. So it stopped. Maybe that happened, or maybe he just like had like a clothespin on his nose whenever it was her time of the month, or like maybe he was just like, peace for a week, I'm going to Canada, see you in a week, I'll be back later. I don't know. Maybe that happened. You don't know. Maybe it did. But as for periods in general, I agree with you. I have never really seen them often, but I can remember clear occasions when I did. There was, one of the first time I ever saw periods in books, depicted in books, I think was with The Singing by Allison something. I think it was by her. I'll pull up a picture if I can find it. It was like 4-book series. I didn't really like this series, okay? But it was 4-book series, and the main character had this moment where she got her period and then she thought she was dying because she had spent all her life being like malnutrition, and she's like now 16, never experienced her period. She's been beaten and abused, and she never had like a female to kind of show her anything that happens to the female body. So once she started to get some food into her, get some meat on her bones, her body was like, pshoo. I read another book, like, I think I read a couple books as a kid where people had periods. There was one where it was a fantasy book. It was like Elisa's Quest or something. It was my favorite series as a kid. And she had her period, and they had like this big huge I don't want to say festival, but I remember like someone having like this little ceremony of her having her womanhood, like her entering into womanhood now, because she started bleeding out of her vagina. So I don't think it's discussed often, not simply because it is a period, but simply because bodily functions in general aren't discussed often in books. But if I had a gander to guess of what females do in post-apocalyptic situations or in fantasy or stuff like that when they have their periods, is that one, they probably have like their own form of drugs if you happen to be one of those unfortunate women who experience terrible cramps. I never was, so like more power to you women who do experience that. For post-apocalyptic ones where it's like in a future of ours, I would say maybe they have diva cups or something, because like if you get a diva cup, then you wouldn't be like looking for scraps of cloth, maybe get like the last pair of pads that are in existence or something. Like you would just have your diva cup, you'd wash it, you'd be good. So maybe in those post-apocalyptic stipulation like situations, you just go searching for your diva cup and you carry it around in your apocalypse bag along with all your other supplies, right? And fantasy situations, a lot of times it's always like they either take some herb. I've had a lot of books where they'll be like, oh, there's some herb you take, some amulet you wear if you happen to, like, most of that has to do with like whether if they want to have sex but don't want to have kids. It's like some herb you take or some necklace you wear. A lot of times it was always described as like cloths. I believe I read a Timor Pierce book where the girls got their periods and then they had their cloths and stuff. So I've read a decent amount of books where it is discussed, so like I guess I can't relate to you there, because I can think of a couple of books where it was discussed, like even Bloody Rose, which was written by a male author. It had one point in it where the main character was realizing how much of an outsider she was to the new group, because the other two females in the group went off because they had to change their clothing, their cloths and whatever, because they both started bleeding at the same time, because their periods were synchronized, and she hadn't gotten hers yet, and she was just like, oh man, I'm not part of the group yet because my period hasn't caught up with everyone else's in the group. So like, I think it is discussed occasionally, but I think that it's just like, it's not talked about simply because it's a bodily function. I don't think, like, showers aren't discussed often, like going to the bathroom isn't discussed often in books just in general. So like, I never really thought anything of it. Plus I've seen it enough in books that there are some authors who do talk about it for whatever reason. Mainly because it has something to do with the story. Like in Bloody Rose, it was to show how much of an outsider the girl felt comparatively to the rest of the group, because she didn't really know them that well and she just joined it. In the singing, it was because the girl was malnutritioned, and that in that other book I mentioned, it was because she had like magical abilities as well, and they kind of came around at the time that she started bleeding, because now she was recognized as a full-grown woman, and that was supposed to be a special thing. Plus the people who kind of held the ceremony to her had their own culture and distinctions of why they did that. In other books, it was mentioned, because I think I read the Timor Pierce one. It was either the Alana series or the Protector of the Small series, and it was mentioned because they were knights, and they were female knights, and there weren't a lot of those. Like, they were the only two at the time, and it was kind of showing like, oh, what they had to do to, you know, still be a knight and move forward. Herbs and stuff were usually mentioned, because it was like the girl wanted to go have sex with somebody, but she didn't want to get pregnant, so there was like a herb or a charm or something like that. So I don't know. I don't know. My theory is it's not mentioned because bathroom issues just generally aren't mentioned. I mean, in those same fantasy books, usually the people do not talk about just going to take a shower. Like, they don't even talk about showering. Like, so they always smell pretty awful. Like, you know they do. We just assume maybe they jumped into a creek, or once they got to the tavern, they decided to, like, take a cloth and wash themselves down. But, like, a lot of times it's not mentioned, and I'm like, you probably smell fucking horrible. So, I guess it's not talked about because it's a part of the biological functions that we prefer not to think about often. As for like specifically like vampires, and specifically Edward, I would just assume that Edward had to learn how to control himself. He's probably like used to smelling period blood a lot, like, but like Bella's had that extra drug addiction feel, so I guess it just has to do with like his self-control. He probably like had his sisters, like, you know, Rosalie was probably beating him every day. Like, every time he started being creepy, it would be like, bitch, don't even think about it. So like, there's that. Yeah, I think it'd just be a lot of self-control on the part of the vampires. Yeah, other than that, like, that's all I have to say on that. Yeah, I assume that most people in post-apocalypse either have diva cups, or maybe they have depot shots. I don't know. Or they just go old school and like rip up a t-shirt and stick it down there. Or a bundle of toilet paper, like, you know, you have to do when you forgot your pad. So maybe that's what they have to do. Other than that, I'm not quite sure. But interesting question. For all of you, how do you think Edward trained himself not to attack Bella when she was on her period? Like, how do you think he did it? Like, does he, like, meditate? Would he meditate a lot? Is that a thing? Do you think he stuffed something up his nose? Like, he just came to school one day and he had, like, his nose clipped together? Did he just not come to school? Because, like, he didn't come to school when it was, like, sunny out. So, like, maybe he just decided, like, girl, it's too dangerous. You be bleeding out your hoo-ha a lot. I'ma just not be here. Or he is a Victorian guy. So he probably just, like, got really grossed out and, like, just pretended it wasn't happening. And you could say, oh yeah, like, you could try to argue with me, like, oh, but Edward was, like, now in the 21st century, but no, he's a Victorian guy. Like, I don't care, he still thinks like a Victorian. Like, the whole, like, how set he was on the marriage thing and, like, certain things a lot. I think he would still have a lot of Victorian sensibilities. So maybe just, like, when it came to Bella on her period, he had the Victorian sensibility mindset where he just didn't mention it at all. He refused to mention it. Yeah. Was that the Victorian time period? I just assume. I don't know anything. I have no idea. Whatever time it was when Edward was changed. Men have always been scared of periods. That's basically my point. And so he was probably just too terrified to bring it up. That's my argument. If you guys have any, like, kind of theories you've came up over the years of what women would do on their periods given their situation and whatever book that you're reading, comment down below. What do you think? I think it is, like, some, like, magical charms and diva cups. But, like, I'm curious, what are your guys' answers for this question? If you like what you're seeing here and you want to continue to see more, click all those bunnies down below, and goodbye, Internet.